You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatimah Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatimah, CEO at Agile Management Office, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. This podcast is made possible thanks to Agile Management Office. We help businesses in 3 key ways: improving organizational culture and delivery, supporting transformation and change, and streamlining governance and processes using 20 years of proven practice and the AMO way model. Now, I'm really excited today about this episode, and I know I say that all the time, but today particularly because I am recording our 100th episode. 100th in just under 2 years is a really, really big feat. It's not something many people get. In fact, many podcasts don't go past episode 5 or 6, let alone 10. So I'm extremely proud of being able to get to the 100th episode. And I was thinking long and hard around what we would cover in the 100th episode. And there was so many different ideas out there, but I decided to keep it really simple. And I thought I would ask the audience. And over the past few weeks and months, I've started asking questions around what people want to hear more about. And so I've collated about 10 or 11 questions that have been asked by people throughout the last few months that I thought I could answer and share with you all today. And those questions range from talking about the relationship between strategy, operations, and delivery, something I talk a lot about, the main differences between agile and traditional PMOs, and what's the use case for hybrid. Also talking about solutions that can be deployed to combat resistance to implementing project management in organizations, how the different types of PMOs versus a strategic PMO, for example, whether it's suitable for companies, what it means to be a PMO leader, talking about how making a case for change and influencing your boss, defining value around the concept of PMO and governance in an organization, people that have inspired me beyond measure, and also thinking about things such as career questions, such as transitioning from an employee to contractor, and some of the steps associated with that as well. So this episode is going to be a bit of a mixed one with a lot of different questions that I will be answering, and those questions have various answers throughout them that hopefully will inspire you or provoke some thoughts for yourself in your career, your business, or in your leadership role. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode. We are almost at 10,000 downloads since we published this podcast. And as I said, welcome and thank you for joining me for the number 100 episode. Thank you so much for listening and being a supporter of this podcast. You are the reason why I continue to record these, and also because my mother said I could talk underwater. So that's hence why I do this podcast. So without further ado, let's get straight into the first question. Question number 1 is, what is the relationship between strategy, operations, and delivery in an organization? So this question comes about through a lot of the talking that I do about the triangle that I refer to, with strategy at the top, delivery on the right, and operations on the left. Now, just to clarify, strategy to me is around the sort of executive direction, strategic objectives of an organization. And then from a delivery perspective, this to me covers projects, programs, portfolio, and the governance associated with changing a business. And then the operations side refers to what some people also call business as usual or BAU. It's all of the supportive functions that enable an organization to run day to day. So HR, finance, sales, marketing, etc. Now, organizations are made up of multiple parts, and so I refer to them as strategy, operations, and delivery. Strategy, in fact, defines the direction in which an organization is going, and it's usually tied to objectives and key results and aligns to the vision and mission of the organization. And so it's really important that organizations have clarity around what their vision and mission is before being able to really put together a strategy that helps the organization to move forward. As a small business, it is something of a challenge to really define the vision and mission clearly, because if you're like me, when I started in business over 10 years ago, it really is something that takes a lot of considered thought. It's not just something you can, think of in, one sentence and assume that the first go is the right go. I mean, there are some businesses who have a really concrete vision and mission, and then they start off the back of that. Or you might be very similar to the way that we started at Agile Management Office, and that was around a problem that we were trying to solve. And the problem we were trying to solve is alignment, or rather lack thereof, between strategy, operations, and delivery. So in order to an organization, once they've got their vision and their mission and defining their strategy, in order to meet that strategy, then we have projects. And projects is effectively where delivery shines. Now, I call it delivery because it's very easy to understand, but delivery enables the organization to develop projects and programs that help to meet that strategy. So effectively, once you have your strategy defined, you need to translate that strategy into projects, and then delivery teams rather execute them. And that's what I call changing the business. The larger the organization, the more well-known the concepts of change the business and run the business are. It's just a commonplace thing that I've seen over many years in corporate. But in a smaller business, sometimes we blur the lines between the strategy and the delivery and operations, because you're often a one-person band, or maybe you have a really small team. So think of strategy as the opportunity to then translate your strategic objectives into projects, and then those projects help you to change your business. When we think about operations, well, operations helps to keep the lights on. It's also known as running the business or run the business. And effectively, when projects go out and deliver change, they then need to effectively hand over to operations. So if you're developing for example, you run a project, in delivery runs a project, and it is implementing a new learning management system or a new HR system, whatever it might be, at the end of the project, when the project ceases to exist, they need to hand over to operations. And so this is where they need to work closely with HR and other departments that are going to be managing the not only the system once it's been deployed, but actually using the system day to day. So that may be leveraging the teams in IT and HR as an example, if it was a HRIS system. So operations effectively helps to run the business. It's keeping the lights on. All projects need to make sure that they are factoring in not only the processes around handing over to support or handing over to the operations team, but also the costs associated with that. A lot of projects tend to get set up and not really spend the time to think about the costs ongoing beyond the project. And this really gets companies unstuck a lot of the time. So ultimately, when setting up the whole Agile Management Office concept in 2016, when I came up with the idea, it was really from that point onwards that I had been shouting at the rooftops that there's got to be a better way to align strategy, delivery, and operations. And that is why I developed the AMO Way model in 2016. And that has served itself as the conduit that aligns strategy, delivery, and operations more effectively than ever before. And we've now used that concept in companies as big as Toyota to as small as the size of my team, which is less than 10 people. We also have tested the concepts in universities and have got some really great results and feedback from those teams as well. So ultimately, the relationship between strategy, operations, and delivery is for the organization to develop the strategic direction, then to have delivery help change the business, and operations to help run the business. And they all need to work really closely together in order to get those results. What is the main difference between Agile and traditional PMO, and what is a use case for hybrid? So this question came in through LinkedIn recently, and I've been hearing a lot about the term Agile PMO. And the thing I think about a lot of the time is, if you think about, and you've been in PMO as long as I have, when I was running PMOs for small, medium, and large businesses, I didn't call my PMO a waterfall PMO. Why are we calling PMOs agile PMOs? Effectively, I argue that every PMO or project management office, for those that are not familiar, should be agile in nature. For example, around agility. Now, when we start calling our PMOs agile, if your PMO is not effective and is causing a lot of rework and stress for project teams and is not getting the results that you need, just putting the label of agile in front of it is not going to drive the change that you need. It's just not going to do that. And so there's too many concepts that are floating around where people are calling things the hybrid PMO and the agile PMO and just all of these different names that are given, but the fundamental problems that are underpinning PMOs today that are causing the problems, and the same things I talked about in my 2019 white paper are still evident in many PMOs today. I definitely think there's been improvements, but ultimately there's still a long way to go. So let's get into the specifics and break it down. First of all, when we think about, agile in the PMO, it's about not only the big agile, so the frameworks, the methods, the standards, etc., but also the small agile. So small agile referring to the mindset and the behaviors. Now, if you are in an organization that is not going down the path of utilizing a specific agile-based methodology for delivery, like a SAFe or a Scrum or a Lean or something like that, then you probably need to emphasize more just on the small agile, which is something that you can apply regardless of whether or not your organization's delivery approach is going to move towards agile. One of the things that I have been saying for a really, really long time, and I will not stop saying this, is the fact that PMOs need to stop building their PMOs based on a project management methodology. PMOs are not project management delivery teams. Now, yes, some PMOs have delivery and governance, but ultimately the concept and the role of PMO is around that governance and that support. And remember, governance means many different things. It means structure, it's the people, and it's the information. It's not just about command and control or any of that. Gone are the days where we think that that is what PMO is, and anyone still doing that has some long way to go yet. So to me, every PMO should be agile in nature, and the PMO's role is to keep up or ahead of delivery, helping to remove the blockers and helping to provide the clearest runway possible so that delivery can get on with doing what they do best, and that is delivering. Unfortunately, I've seen PMOs take on Scrum roles, Scrum Master roles, Agile coaching roles, and many, many other roles in an Agile environment. And you know what? That's not a bad thing if the people in those roles are willing to roll up their sleeves and learn about some of the skills associated with them, but don't use the PMO role as a catch-all for everything. Ultimately, a PMO is there to help make delivery as streamlined as possible by providing the support and also the alignment to strategy and operations so that delivery can just get on with delivery. In my experience, when we think about the concept of hybrid PMO, well, if I was to look at all the PMOs that I've ever run in the last 20 years, I would say that they've all been hybrid because effectively they've all had elements of waterfall and agile and lean and Kanban and all sorts of different methods that I've taken what's right from my perspective, from my environment, my maturity in the organization, and put them together and brought the right techniques, methods, tools, and behaviors to then be able to drive outcomes. For example, when working with one client who moved to value streams, the PMO role was reinvented, and initially there was thinking about removing the whole concept of the PMO, but we helped to reshape the PMO so that it added value and it didn't look like a roadblocker for the organization. And so it's very possible to have an effective running PMO in an agile environment. The next question is around what solutions can be deployed to combat resistance to implementing project management and governance methodologies in organizations and teams. So this one came through from Facebook. So when we think about that as a question, and you think about individuals in general, individuals like you and I tend to find security in traditional approaches to life in general and in different situations. And so when we think about one of the major reasons for resistance to change, it's often uncertainty. It's uncertainty about the impact that the change will have to our day-to-day, and also the uncertainty it will have on our job security. The fear of unknown is always going to have a major impact on the decisions that us as individuals make. Now, I can see with over the last 6 or 7 years with the rise of Agile, and I know Agile's been around for over 25 years, but the rise of more and more companies bringing it on board, it's a real big shakeup because often the larger the business, the more transformational approach that they take to Agile. And it can be really unsettling when you have been working in a particular role for a really long time and then you're asked to completely reinvent everything that you're doing. And so I find that the resistance is usually uncertainty. So when we think about defining a solution to combat resistance, the key part of it is to start your solution with awareness first. So let's not go too hard, too fast. Try to drive the awareness and clarity. I mean, we spend a lot of the first few weeks with clients deep diving into their challenges and listening to them because it's impossible to really understand where they're coming from without taking the time to understand and have those conversations. Once you do that, you'll then be able to get to a position where over time, you'll be able to introduce new methods, tools, behaviors, changes, techniques, etc., that people will start to repeat. And once you start having some repeatability in the project management and governance space, you'll then find opportunities to drive other incremental improvements. One of the ways that I do this, which is part of the AMO way model, is by providing ample opportunity for people to get involved. In fact, every single change that my team does involves people across strategy, delivery, and operations. And that's what makes it so unique. When it comes to governance, it's no different. You need to show people what's in it for them. What is the value they're going to get by making the change to what they do today? If you can ask them what some of their challenges are, and then demonstrate how the project management and governance suggestions that you have can be a solution, not a new problem, they're going to be more likely to be open to the change. Some other smaller ideas is you can run showcases, co-design solutions, and also test some concepts with the teams incrementally. Bring them on board that journey and you'll find there'll be a lot less resistance. Next question is whether a strategic PMO is suitable for small companies or companies with less than 5 projects. And this one's also come from LinkedIn. Now, every PMO anywhere, no matter the size, should have an element of strategy, tactical, and operational lens. And that is important to align to the organization overall. So when thinking about a small company, which is one that I am in today, I've rarely seen a PMO present. And the reason for that is it's often because they're not really aware of the PMO concept. It's usually quite new. So even though, for example, in our business, I'm very familiar with the concept of PMO, it isn't something that's very common in small businesses. Usually it's just more of an overhead, if anything. So it may be unlikely for a small business of 5 projects to need a strategic PMO, let alone a PMO for that matter. Though there isn't anything stopping you from introducing a few PMO-like features to support those projects. For example, you might develop a standardized approach to prioritizing the projects or change requests that come from those projects. But I would say that the times that I've seen a strategic PMO in full swing is often in a larger global business who wants a closer view rather on a large investment portfolio. And the strategic PMO is there typically at the investment level, at the enterprise level, and not really involved in projects day to day. But they usually use a strategic PMO to do that sort of demand management, planning, prioritization, and also provide reporting up the line to the boards. So yes, you probably don't need a PMO for 5 projects in a small business. It might just be about using some of the concepts of PMO day to day in those projects, and then over time you can scale that. Next question is, are the expectations of a PMO usually aligned with the role, responsibilities, and authorities of a PMO? So this one's interesting because there is completely different ways that PMOs are set up and where they report to in organizations. And so the higher up the PMO and the more aligned it is to the C-suite, the more likely it has authority. But for the most part, many PMOs don't. And so if I just think about it conceptually, to start with, expectations around PMOs are already misunderstood because of the misalignment of where they report to. And that's because also sometimes people who have had the experience working with a PMO might have had some good past experience, but a lot of time they might have also had a bad past experience. So I would say that a PMO's role, responsibilities, and authority is determined by a number of factors, including where it reports to in an organization. For example, a PMO reporting to the COO will have a lot more authority than a PMO reporting into a portfolio further down the hierarchy. So expectations and reality will differ, and that's why I recommend that PMOs create a charter and a showcase, and then a showcase of what they're going to be offering to the wider business to start to drive awareness of the roles and responsibilities, and also what authority that they may have. The next question came up through a direct message, actually, on LinkedIn to myself. Someone asking about having little experience in the project management field and was wondering if I could be so kind as to advise on next steps. They say, I hope to build a strong career foundation and become an industry professional in the next 5 to 10 years. So in this sort of question, I know that it was originally starting to be about project management, but I've just decided to make it a bit more general. So, I have little experience in X field, and that field could be anything. It could be project management, it could be beautician, it could be being a chef, it could be as a senior manager, it could be running a business, it could be anything. So what would I recommend in terms of next steps to build that experience and that career foundation in order to be an industry professional? So one of the things that I can't stress enough is that it's really important, especially when you're early on in your career, to take the opportunity, particularly if you are someone who perhaps you're still living at home and don't have the overheads of, the need to be working a certain amount of hours to pay a mortgage or things like that. If you can afford to, spend as much time as you can volunteering, doing intern work, getting work experience, any experience you can get. And a lot of the time, I know, because I've been through this hurdle over the last 20 years, where I've spent a really long time trying to get experience. And early on in my career, I would constantly get rejection as to not being able to be given the opportunity for new roles, even though I felt like I could meet 60 or 70% of the skills and learn the rest. But sometimes companies don't want to spend the time to get people up to speed. And if they were going to do that, they wouldn't be hiring external. They would just be focusing on their internal teams. So sometimes, and like I did in my first role, is I was adamant that I wanted to work in retail and not fast food, and where my sisters both before me had gone. And I decided that I wanted to actually work in a retail environment because I thought it would give me more scope. And so I just walked into one of the Woolworths stores and actually put my resume in front of them and said, I want to offer my time as work experience for free for a week. And look, at the time it was closer to Christmas, so they had a lot more demand. And it's very little effort for them to get me on board as work experience because there's no payroll, they don't have to pay anything, etc. So I was able to get my foot in the door in a big retailer, and then I was then offered a job a week later, and I stayed there for 3 or 4 years. Other opportunities include volunteering. So I remember volunteering at a nursing home. Now, not many people in our class wanted to do that, but I knew that it would give me skills such as patience and communication and, working with different groups. So again, finding ways to volunteer, whether you're volunteering once a year around Christmas time, maybe you're volunteering throughout the year, maybe you're mentoring other people in, a particular sport or something you're skilled at. Regardless of what it is important to get experience and getting it in any way you can. I also remember putting my hand up to be the chief fire warden for a building that I was working in many years ago. And I didn't need to do that, but it meant that I was able to learn leadership skills, communication skills, stakeholder management skills, planning, reporting, risk management, all those sorts of things that you wouldn't otherwise get without that experience of working in those environments. And one other thing I would also consider as a recommendation is even attempting to do, if you want to work in the project management space, come up with pretend projects. I remember when I was 7 years old, I opened up a pretend cafe, And I had to actually set it up like a little project to actually build out the cafe. Now, back then, I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't know what a project was. But now I recall and I remember some of the skills that I'd use day to day are from those sorts of experiences. Even when I was in very early stages of high school, I remember setting up a whole concept. And my sister and my cousin and I created a whole concept themed around different artists and actually raised a lot of money that we then donated to the local vet, and getting parents to contribute, food and also running a barbecue, etc. So anything you can do to pretend that you're doing a project or putting that experience into practice is going to go a long way. So experience is my number one recommendation, and finding that in internship, volunteers, work experience, etc., and pretend projects. The second one I would say is knowledge. So staying up to date, be part of groups or in your industry. So if you are, wanting to be a garden business owner or expert in gardening, then stay up to date with those sorts of gardening groups, whether it's on Facebook, LinkedIn, maybe part of a Reddit group, etc. Just getting enough knowledge and information to stay up to date with your industry groups, attend webinars, read as many books as you can. And, the best thing you can do is just Google all this information and just absorb it like a sponge. Because having that knowledge and staying up to date with what's going on in the industry is going to go a long way in helping you to become that professional that you want to be in the 5 to 10 years later. And third, and probably one of the most important, is mentorship. So finding one or more mentors. I have had many mentors over my career, both professionally and personally, as well as in business. And each mentor you have does not need to be the same person forever, although if they're really good and they're willing to give you that time, great. But if you're like me, you might go through cycles and have different mentors for different things. So for example, I had mentoring and coaching around sales and marketing skills, or CEO coaching when I started business, or coaching around project management early on in my career when I was trying to learn the ropes. So finding one or more mentors, and the easiest way to do that is just by asking the question and making it really, really easy for the mentor to not be put out of their way to help you. So offer them a really easy way to do that, whether it's online, whether you're offering a set time, your flexibility, etc. Find someone that you admire and see how they've done it, but then follow your own path and leverage their insights so that you can continue on that learning journey. So there you have it. Knowledge, experience, and mentorship will hopefully help you in becoming that industry professional in the next 5 to 10 years. The next question is, how does a PMO define its value? Okay, so this one is an easy one because a PMO's value is in the eyes of its customers. Simple as that. The PMO value is defined by the value that is seen to be received from its customers. Because if we don't have projects to support in the PMO, then we don't have the need for a PMO. If you want to go down to the next level of detail, then we can think about defining the value through different measurements around the success of uptake of the process, success around employee engagement, the success metrics associated with the projects that you're supporting, return on investment for setting up your PMO and the ongoing costs. We can also look at the identification of savings in time and cost. And there's a number of other metrics that you can use as well. They're some of the ones that immediately come to mind. But ultimately, the metrics are varied and will vary by company, by maturity, by the size of your PMO, by the scale, by when it was set up. Either way, it's important that we know that the value is in the eye of its customers, or the customers being our stakeholders. But if you do not define some upfront success metrics with your customers, it's really hard to get an objective view as to whether or not your PMO is defining value. So I would talk to your customers, work together to define some success metrics, whether it's around employee engagement or return on investment or cost savings, etc., and work towards achieving those. And that is how effectively you will demonstrate value to your customer, not just from a subjective view, but also from an objective view as well. Next question we have is, how can you make a good case for change when it comes to influencing your boss? Well, this question depends on what you want to influence. For example, are you looking to influence them because you want to ask for a promotion? Do you want them to give you funding to run a new project? Do you want them to change the role that you're doing or the location? Or maybe it's something else altogether. So it really depends on what exactly you're trying to influence as to how long and how you'd go about it. For me, one example that I tend to do to show that I'm trustworthy and capable in front of bosses is to effectively prove to them that I'm reliable by doing what I'd say I'm going to do, and then delivering enough value to others that are working with that manager so that they can then say that they've also been getting the right value and service and support from myself too. So effectively, if you're providing a great service, even if you are an individual in the company, to your peers, it will come back to your boss, and your boss will actually understand that you are someone to be, trusted and reliable, etc., because people are going to be doing the selling for you. So that all goes a really long way with helping your the impressions that your boss will have of you, in addition to you yourself every day doing things like putting your hand up to support where you can, if you've got the capacity to, being very transparent and proactive around how you communicate. For example, don't wait for your boss to come to you. Rather, you set in motion a series of objectives and key results that you intend to meet before working towards them, and getting that clarity up front and agreement with your boss is going to go a long way. If you are trying to influence a particular action, maybe you can put some milestones in place to say to your boss that if you meet A, B, and C, that you then given the support to go down path D, whatever that may be for you. Ultimately, being visible goes a long way, giving your best and helping others around you so that way it gets back to your boss that you are not only the right person for the role that you're in, but also someone who could be looked up to as a potential promotion material, if that's the path that you're trying to take in influencing your boss and their decisions moving forward. But always really depends on what you want to influence. So hopefully that covers your question. Who is one famous person that has inspired me beyond measure that I would love to have on my podcast other than Richard Branson? Okay. So whoever submitted this one knows me really well. I have met Sir Richard Branson once, and I would love to have him on my podcast, but that will be forever on my vision board, and maybe one day it'll happen. But this is a hard one, as there are so many people that I admire, a lot of them. And to be honest, I was thinking about recently preparing for the new year who I want to get on my podcast. And someone I've been spending a lot of time listening to, particularly their podcast daily, is Gary Vaynerchuk, or Gary V for short. I've been listening to his podcast daily now for probably, I'd say, at least a couple of years. He was someone I listened to quite a lot during COVID as well. And I just find his story and his journey quite inspiring, and his energy and tenacity is unmatched. I've learned a lot about leadership, about customer experience, about marketing, and about just all round being a good human being, which is, something that he stresses quite a lot in his podcasts. And I've read a few of his books, and they all make a lot of sense, and some really good things that he says. And I find that his journey and his story is inspiring. But I am often told by people that, my energy is out of this world, or how do I have the energy to do so much? But I've never listened to someone or, sort of experienced someone else's journey the way that I have been following Gary Vaynerchuk's, and have seen just how unmatched his tenacity and his energy is. I'm just really in awe of that, especially the fact that he does talk a lot about not being someone who suffers from anxiety, which is something I suffer from. And I wonder whether, if anxiety wasn't a hurdle for me, whether I could have the same energy and tenacity that he has, because I wouldn't spend as much time worrying about things, which is something that people like myself who are anxious quite often do. So he would probably be the person who's inspired me a lot lately, and would be someone I would love to have on my podcast. So Gary Vaynerchuk, if you're listening, I would welcome to have you on the podcast anytime. What does it mean to be a PMO leader? So just last month, we, along with my business partner, Joe, PMO Joe from the US, we launched the second annual PMO Leader Global Conference, and we had some 18 hours of continuous webinar that was live across 3 regions. And we had an army of volunteers that supported us and people that contributed and supported this whole event along the way. And one of the questions I set out to ask was this exact question, which I put in front of other PMO leaders around the world that I look up to and find inspiring in their journeys, and ask them the same question. So I, along with my peers, were asked that recently, and I actually agree with all of their responses, and you can check out the video on the PMO Leader website. But ultimately, a PMO leader is about bringing great leadership to an already complex environment. An environment around projects is hard. We know a lot of projects fail, and it's because the environment around projects is hard. It's the communication. It's about managing the scope. It's about timelines. It's about the environment we're in. It's about the people working on those projects. Either way, the environment is complex. And so a PMO's role is about bringing leadership and supporting delivery as best as you can, so that the project delivery teams around you and your team as well can thrive. It's about helping to provide the best structure, foundations, repeatability, and support for an organization. It's about demonstrating the right behaviors. It's about helping drive change and lead change from the front. It's about being open-minded, about being flexible, about being adaptable to the situation. But also, most of all, it's also about having fun. And this last question for today has come from an email that we had in response to an ebook that someone downloaded off the Agile Management Office website. And they said, thanks for the ebook around transitioning from employee to contractor. It was very informative. Would you happen to know of any other resources or good books that tell you step by step on what to do once you find your first contract? I have a contract, but I am not sure what I should do first, such as talk to an accountant, open an LLC, which is equivalent of like a PTY Ltd in Australia, but in the US, get a lawyer, and so on and so forth. Any help would be appreciated. So this question is obviously going to be based on each individual circumstances, and I am not familiar with what the process is sort of in the US, which I assume this person is from because they've talked about LLCs. But I can tell you that when you just decide to make the move into a contractor, the easiest way to do that is usually to go through a third-party agency. So when I started my career contracting path, I had basically went from being a fixed-term contractor, which at the time I didn't know was very similar to an employee, to just a daily rate contractor, which meant that I was basically paid through an agency. And I just continued to do that for the first half of my career. And the reason I did that is because, 1, it was easier. 2, it made sense to do it at the time. And 3, there wasn't any real need, especially back then, to set up a whole business structure and put in place a business number and name and all of that for just an individual myself, especially when I wasn't going to be trying to leverage my income for, self-managed super fund or anything like that. So for me, and each person's individual circumstances are different, and this is by no means any accounting or legal advice. So please talk to your accountant and your lawyer before making any decisions. I'm personally giving you my own story and experience from what I did, but it could be completely different for you. So I just stayed as an individual contractor through an agency. Now, when I decided that I wanted to move to what they call here in Oz as a sole trader, that was because I wanted to be responsible for managing my own income and my own taxes, and pay my taxes not every month, the way that you currently do if you're in Australia, but actually pay it quarterly. So I had to actually go down a bit of a different approach to do that. And what I did was focused on actually developing sort of a spreadsheet that I used, and I found one online, and then I modified it. And I then had someone who was working with me at the company. So in the team that I was working in, to actually put me in touch with their accountant, who they spoke very highly of. Now, did I immediately speak to the accountant from like day one? No, I waited a little bit because I felt confident enough in what I was doing initially, but then I needed to validate that. So I did seek out an accountant just to get some advice. So I stayed as a sole trader. And then afterwards, I ended up moving to having an Australian business number, or an ABN. And that, again, has its own structure and its own reporting requirements, its own tax rules, so far and so forth. So by that point, I definitely needed an accountant. And I did go down the path of having an accountant who then put me in contact with a number of different sources and links. So, for example, a good resource would be your local Chamber of Commerce, which we have lots of them here in Australia, and I'm sure there'll be some others maybe with a different name. That is kind of like the hub, I guess, for people in business, and it connects you to, other professions. It also connects you to the right information and tools and resources. So there's a lot of government websites that have a lot of free tools for people starting out and going into a contractor role that you can download online. And that's definitely what I did when I first started, and then getting that information validated with an accountant. When you get an ABN or Australian business number and you set up a business name and all of that sort of thing, it then opens up the door for you to having to do the reporting and effectively reporting on your own earnings and paying your own taxes, etc. So definitely talk to an accountant for sure. And think about the pros and cons of why you do that. As I said, if you could go through an agency, then they usually take care of all of that for you and you don't have to worry about it. But it's only when you want to have your own business name and business number that it ends up becoming something that becomes more involved. So yeah, just have that in mind, but definitely get some advice from an accountant. And there's plenty of business websites online that can provide you some insights to help you as some resources to use moving forward, in addition to the ebook that we provided on our website. So there you have it. There were some of the questions that came through from the audience over the last few weeks and months that we've collated. And I hope that you have found some of this information useful. We do have plans to bring on some more guests for the new year. And so if you can think of anyone you'd like to refer or recommend for the podcast, please reach out to us at contact@agilemanagementoffice.com, all one word. If you have any feedback, please also let me know. I'm always open to feedback. Constructive feedback is always welcome. And then finally, if I can leave you with one last thing, as part of our 100th episode, we have hundreds of people listening to this podcast every single time we release one. If just 10% of you could go and leave a podcast review either on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, or on Google Play, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, it will take you no more than 30 seconds, and it would mean the absolute world to me. Leading up to Christmas, it would be so great to just know that you are listening and enjoying this podcast, just leaving me a review. I would really appreciate it. Otherwise, I hope you are all well and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile Ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?